All right, I want to say welcome back to the master teacher himself in the flesh, Obenfo Kambon. How's everything?
I'm Black Powerful. How are you?
Everything's wonderful, right? I want to get right into the information. The first thing I would like to ask is that from what I understand, you're a practitioner of capoeira.
I am.
All right. Can you tell our viewers about the history of martial arts in Africa and why the world focuses on fighting styles out of Asia?
So first off, well, there's a proverb that says it's a silly daughter who tries to teach her mother how to bear children. So anytime we say martial, that's coming from the word Mars, and that's related to, of course, the Roman god of war. And essentially, what we're doing in naming it martial arts is that we're saying that the cart came before the horse. We're saying that the mother knew how to give birth. The daughter knew how to give birth before the mother. So when you look at the tomb of Baket, this is again in classical Kemet, you'll see a mural that has all known wrestling positions. And there were like wrestling manuals, at the end of the 1800s and 1900s that were saying that there are no wrestling moves that are known now that you can't find inside of this tomb of Baket the third. So, essentially, when people talk about Greco-Roman wrestling or, so forth and so on, it's very, very common knowledge that, of course, the Greeks studied in classical Kemet. So for those who are interested, they can look at Our Stolen Legacy by Nana George D.M. James. And, you'll find everyone from Solon, the lawgiver, to Thales, supposedly their first philosopher, to Pythagoras, the mathematician, to, you name it. All of them, Plato, he even talks about how many drachma he had to pay for a ferry in order to get to Kemet. Like, you're not considered a scholar at that point in time in the world unless you're studying in Kemet. And there's a book of Plato's called The Laws, where, he's asked by his companion, essentially, what do you think of Greek education? And he says that he's embarrassed when he thinks of Greek education because Greek education is education for guzzling swine. And he says that he wishes that the freeborn among the Greeks would learn as much of their numbers and letters as the innumerable crowd of those in quote unquote Egypt, again using the Egyptos, a term that the Greeks would use, of course, as Kemet, literally the land of black people. So, again, when you talk about Greco-Roman, you'll see things about the Olympics and all these things, the boxing and so forth, but you'll see in murals carved into stone on the walls, you'll see stick fighting arts, you'll see wrestling arts, you'll see all of these. And all of those are still done by black people in the places that we migrated to. So if you look at Senegal and the Gambia, you'll find lamb, right? If you look at Yoruba, Ijakadi, which is another grappling system. If you go to Angola, then that's where you'll find Ngolo, which is, what now they would refer to as capoeira. There's a good documentary called Body Games. In Portuguese, it's called Jogo de Corpo. And in it, Mr. Kobar Mansa, he actually goes to Angola and he meets with the elders. And he, looks at Ngolo, he looks at Kambangula, he looks at Kandeja. And Kandeja is more like a slap boxing type of thing. And when he actually shows how they do it there, where they actually hold their arms up like this, and it's very similar to like how black people in the snakes would do slap boxing. And he shows that in Brazil you find that exact same thing, and some of the elders are talking about, oh yeah, that was common in our neighborhood and so forth. Kambangola has more of a grappling type of aspect. And you'll see that at certain times in the capoeira, and then of course Ngolo is what most people know, which is Malumutunga. Basically, there's a proverb that says that the hands are for building and then the legs are for destroying. And you'll find all of these moves. So what they call Habojihaya, that is the stingray's tail. There's an elder there who's still, oh yeah, this is how we do it. So Mestre Cobra Matsu will display it. The elder from Angola is displaying it. He's like, this is the exact same move that we do. So for those who are interested, you'll find that, again, you find Surma, stick fighting. You'll find Zulu, stick fighting. You'll find grappling arts. Northern Ghana is known for that as well. The Igbo are known for that as well. So, all throughout the continent, you have these combat sciences. When it comes down to why people think about Eastern Eurasia. Again, I don't deal with Asia as a separate continent or Europe as a separate continent. It's all one landmass called Eurasia. But when you look at Eastern Eurasia, in terms of their studies, they say that Bodhidharma, also known as Buddha, a black man in India came and spread these arts and sciences throughout. So you still find Buddhist temples. Baba Runoko Rashidi was one who would go and he would find like the oldest images of Buddha where he's depicted as black, where he's depicted with Bantu knots and things of that nature. So even where it comes to there, that's where they trace the origin of where it's now Kung Fu, Taekwondo. But part of the reason why, especially black people think about Eastern Eurasia when they think about combat sciences is because at one point in time, China had very little to offer the world except for Kung Fu movies, right? Nowadays, anything you pick up, it says made in China, whether it's a chair, whether it's a stick, whether it's a drone, all of those types of things. But, essentially what they decided to do is rely on their own cultural product and glorifying their cultural product. There's a documentary that we showed a couple of years ago called The African Man Who Wanted to Fly. And this is, a brother out of, I want to say it was either Gabon or Equatorial Guinea. I think it was Gabon. And he grew up looking at these Kung Fu movies, so he wanted to wear Chinese clothes. He wanted to do Chinese arts. He wanted to eat Chinese food. It got to the point where he actually saved up all of his pennies and whatever, his little, money together in order to actually fly to China because he wanted to fly like he saw in these Kung Fu movies. So, picture in the 70s and early 80s. So he actually did that, and he flew there. He started, competing in wushu competitions. He actually married a Chinese woman. The Chinese people were like, he's more Chinese than the Chinese are themselves. Eats the food. He played in the movies and so forth. So, this is what we call cultural imperialism in the form of soft power. And, because the Chinese were interested in cultural imperialism, this is why they, projected their images all throughout the world. In Senegal right now, lamb is more, popular than football or soccer, as they would say in the United States. And that's one of the, cases where you can see the indigenous arts are winning out against, there's this idea that, your culture is your immune system. Mama Marimba Ani says that. And, when you have a weak immune system, it means anything can come in. At least in that regard, in Senegal and the Gambia, you can see that their immune system is strong enough that their own combat sciences are still strong. You'll find, other places, they have this dambe, which is this Hausa, boxing, one-arm boxing, where it's essentially you're operating with one arm like it's a shield and then the other arm like it's a spear. And, it's a very, very interesting form of boxing where, brings all these other aspects into it. You'll find in Madagascar, you'll find Moringi and some of the islands, on the east side, where they do Moringi. And it has certain aspects that look a lot like capoeira in that regard. But, basically all throughout the continent, when we go through space and we go through time, so we can go as far back as, classical Kemet, you can see these, combat sciences. Tasseti, the land of the bow, is what they were referred to as, the Nubia area was now modern day Sudan. And, they were known, the land of the bow, literally they're known for their archery and, things of that nature. Now, when you think of archery, for those who follow it, you're thinking about South Korea in terms of winning, these competitions, archery competitions. But, when your entire nation is named the land of the bow, and there are certain documents that talk about how they could, somebody's riding around, the enemy is riding around the horse, and the archer is standing there like, however many 2 football fields away, and he asks the guy, do you want me to hit you in your left eye or your right eye? As he's going back and forth on the horse, left eye. He shoots the arrow, and it's so accurate that it hits the guy in the left eye as he's moving around on a horseback, right? So, you have all those types of, stories in terms of the proficiency in combat sciences. And then again, when we look at classical Kemet, when they're doing it, they're not doing it so much of a sport as in, the form of warfare. So if you look at the world's oldest historical narrative on warfare, that's the autobiography of Imahu Weni, where he talks about the ruler who brought together, warriors from both the sides of the house, from upper and lower Kemet, And then from all the Nubians, the Nahasyu is the term that was used. So he mentions Wawat Nahasyu, Irjet Nahasyu, Ka'au Nahasyu, the Nahasyu from Jemailand. So basically, you have every kind of black person coming together in order to drive out the Amu, and that's the term that was used for Eurasians back in the day. So, you're talking about, the so-called Old Kingdom. I refer to that as the first Black Age, the first age of Ma'at before the incursions of the Amu, the Eurasians, into the land of black people. But again, you have all these documents that go into warfare. You have a text called, the autobiography of Yamos, son of Abana, where he's actually going into the war strategies, the siege strategies that were used in order to drive out the Hakau Hasut. That's the Hyksos. And then, even if you go all the way back to the Narmer Palette, I actually have a book that I'm working on called The Construction of Black Civilization. Of course, that's a shout out to Nana Chancellor Williams, who has Destruction of Black Civilization. But basically what I'm going through is all the way from the Narmer Palette up until, let's say, around 1500 BCE. So that's like around the foundation of Kemet all the way to the expulsion of the Hyksos. And basically it's dealing with, as long as we maintained that this is Kemet, the land of black people, then Kemet stayed strong. As soon as, you're looking at around the time of Saras and Wosret, the second and third, this is when the Hakau Hasut first came in. And they came in very meek, initially bringing gifts. There's a mural that actually shows them, bringing gifts, and ibex and so forth. But eventually, these are the first ones to run roughshod to the point where, they beheaded Nana Sarah, Sekenenre Tao, put a hatchet in his forehead and a spear through his cheek and so forth. But they were driven out in this war of black liberation by Yamos, whose body you can still see in the museum there in Waset. And then, of course, Kamos and so forth. So, where it goes into combat sciences, this is something that where we go way back into time. You can see it when you look at recent times. Of course, you can see it, and it still lives on in the combat sciences all throughout the length and breadth of the continent. So I actually have an article that those who are interested, they can check out my website. It's obadelekambon.com, and then click on publications. And it's about cultural imperialism in the form of quote unquote martial arts, right? The combat sciences that we have, it's like we don't know about them because everybody here knows about Kung Fu, or they know about Taekwondo, or they know about, whatever it is, karate or so forth and so on. But again, we have a rich and long history of combat sciences, and the original use of that was for driving out those exact same people, the Amu, from the land of black people.
Next question I have, right, is that in the States now, right, especially in the Northeast, there's a big conversation about UFOs and extraterrestrial flying objects, right? Can you please tell us about the African understanding of UFOs, and have there been any recent sightings of UFOs in Ghana?
I'm not aware of any sightings of UFOs. For those who may not be aware, it's unidentified flying objects. So there are any type of objects that can fly. And it's interesting, a brother who I mentioned before we started, Heru, he asked me about, a text from Kemet. It's actually a carving on a wall where, people are on, white social media saying, oh, it looks like a UFO, it looks like a helicopter and so forth. And, it would be like somebody who's reading the alphabet ABC and they see the letter A and they say, oh, that looks like a rocket, right? It looks like a rocket ship. If you know how to read, you're like, no, that's just the letter A. No, literally, that's the letter A, right? Because he's like, oh, that looks like a helicopter. No, that's just the letter T. There's a letter. I know how to read. So if you actually, it's what they call palimpsest, and that's where you have one carving on top of another carving, and this is where you're looking at a carving that was made initially by the father, which is Sarah Seti, and then it was carved over by the son, which is Sarah Ramesu, Usamat Rasatepenra. So, because of him carving on top of his father's inscription, then for somebody who doesn't know how to read, they're seeing it and they're like, oh, this looks like a UFO or whatever. But literally, if you know their names, you're actually just reading their names, one written on top of the other very clearly. So there's that. As far as I know, when you talk about the Northeast, I've, come across something in the news that mentioned, drones that were over New Jersey. Feel like, what are they, so forth and so on. I know a couple of years back there was concern about a Chinese weather balloon, and they were saying, no, it's not a weather balloon, it's whatever, surveillance balloon. They eventually shot that down and so forth. I've also looked in the news about North Korea that's sending, trash over to South Korea in retaliation of South Korea sending these balloons over to North Korea that has pamphlets about, all the freedom that they have and, K-pop music and so forth. You're like, if you're sending this garbage to us, then we're going to send garbage right back to you. Literally, garbage,
Literal garbage.
literal garbage, right? So as far as New Jersey, I've seen like the FBI director was, saying that they don't know what the drones are and so forth and so on. Now to come to your question about the continent, when people look at, for example, the Dogon, so the Dogon say that they come from Potolo, which is, that's what they refer to as Sirius A, Sirius B, that star system. And then they say there's another one that's there as well. And you find also the significance of that star system in the form of Sepdet in classical Kemet, where that was associated with Auset, right? So when people talk about the virgin birth and so forth and so on, the father was associated with the belt of Orion. That's those three stars that you find in the belt of Orion. And those who are interested, you're actually at the right time of year to see this, because those three stars in the belt of Orion point directly to Sapdet, and then you continue on that line, and it goes to the southeast, exactly where the sun rises, which is Heru, on December 25th, right? So it was down for 3 days. So anytime they talk about, oh, the Savior died, was down for 3 days and then rose up, they're actually talking about where the sun gets to its lowest point in the sky, perceptibly stays there for 3 days, and eventually rises 1 degree until it, and that's the solstice, right? That's the sun at its lowest point, the winter solstice. Then it gets to the equinox, which is equal night and day, and then it gets to the summer solstice, which is the sun at its highest point in the sky from our perception, in the northern hemisphere, which is where we are in Ghana as well. So when, you have the significance of Sapdet, whether that's in classical Kemet or Portolo amongst the Dogon, what they are talking about is that essentially, if you read like the Pale Fox, if you read Conversations with Ogotumeli, you have variations on a common theme in terms of the origin of where everything came from. And they talk about an explosion that was so bright that it was invisible and so loud that it was inaudible. So essentially, this is what modern quote unquote science will refer to as a Big Bang, right? And they're saying that the place where it happened was right there at Potolo. So it's interesting to try to, extrapolate this type of idea of, okay, well, if you are coming from this idea that all of this started off in one singular point, and they're saying that that's the singular point at which it came about. And they mention, these different stages of it as well. So, initially you have, an egg where all of the sounds of the world were inside this egg. You have a seed, which is digitaria, which is, the single, it's like the size of sand, like this tiny, tiny grain, and everything that exists exploded out from that grain and became everything that we know now. That's the sense in which they're talking about everybody came from there. They're not talking about, oh, in recent times we hopped in a UFO and then flew down when they talk about Nomo. So all of those things are, things that go into everything that exists came from that point, right? And then, modern day scientists can dispute, well, where did it start off and so forth and so on. I know with the James Webb Space Telescope, they're finding, galaxies that shouldn't be there, spiral galaxies that are beyond anything that, they think, or in the old model they thought could exist at that point in time, because the further away you look in space, literally that's the further back you're looking in time in terms of how many light years it took for that to happen. But it's interesting to look at the parallel between the Dogon creation story and then that of classical Kemet, because in classical Kemet, the beginning creation story and the end creation story give you conditions that are actually one and the same. So in the beginning, like Khumnu, that's the place of where we're sitting right now, the place of the eight. That's why this structure has 8 sides and there are 8 pillars, and the lights have 8 sides, and then, everything is 8, right? There are 8 lights around here because it's a shout out to classical Kemet, the place of the 8. So they say that in the beginning you had Amen, Amenet, Nun, Naunet, Keket, and Hehet, which is to say that in the beginning you had masculine and feminine hiddenness, masculine and feminine wetness, masculine and feminine darkness, and masculine and feminine infiniteness. Now, what that is actually a metaphor for the womb, and it's to say that if you understand procreation, then you understand creation. And if you understand creation, you understand procreation because the two are literally one and the same. So the creation stories, it's actually, better to say a transformation story than a creation story because the idea is that what existed was always there. It's just that they transformed into other forms. And you'll find that in the name of Sarah Tutankhamun, who they call King Tut, right? Where one of his names is Nebkhepru Ra, which is the owner of the transformations of Ra. And if you look at, modern day, understandings of the formation of the solar system or any, solar system, our own or otherwise, you have this idea that you have, this gas cloud, right? That eventually, because of gravity, it starts to condense upon itself. It gets to the point where it's so dense that you have, an atom that fuses with another atom, and then that brings about, a T-Tauri star is going on this line to becoming a main sequence star. But essentially, all of that gas condenses until eventually this nuclear fusion takes off and it becomes a star. Now, anything that wasn't part of that star, it eventually congeals together and becomes planets, where it's a gas giant like, what they call Jupiter, or, a rocky, planet like the one that we're on right now. That, that's any of the gas that didn't become part of the sun itself, right? Or Ra in that form, Khepra in the beginning. So, essentially what they're talking about is when they say that we are transformations of Ra, is quite literal, right? When they refer to the ruler as the son of Ra, literally all of us are made out of star stuff, right? All the things that stars are made out of, that's exactly what we're made out of. Whether you're looking at the heavy elements that form at that point in time, whether that's iron and so forth and so on, gold, all of that is inside of us. And when we talk about minerals and vitamins, it's because of those types of considerations. But again, to go back to what they were referred to as a quote unquote creation story, or as I would prefer, transformation story, that is when everything was dark, wet, hidden, and infinite. And you have another book of, when you talk about the book of vindication, the book of coming forth by day, it's a dialogue that's between Atum, which represents, in some degree, the word tum is to come to a cease, to end, but that's the quote unquote creator divinity, and Usir. And Usir is represented with death, but also regeneration in that form. And, you have this lamentation where, there are no, at this point, everything is hidden, wet, dark, and infinite again. And the only two entities that exist are Atum and Usir. And then they transform into serpents, and then they dissipate into this hidden, wet, dark infiniteness. And basically what they're saying is that the end is the beginning, and the beginning is the end. So in classical Kemet, that would be a snake with its tail in its mouth called Mehen. Amongst, in Dahomey, they were referred to as Da'aido, Hedo, or Dambala, which is, this rainbow serpent with its own tail in its mouth. In classical Kemet, you'll see Usir, who's depicted as having his feet, wrapped around and then touching the back of his head, right? And all of that represents the beginning is the end, and the end is the beginning. So, when you look at those types of creation stories, it's no different from essentially the Dogon at the point in time before this big bang that they describe. And then they refer to everything coming out in a whirling motion, like a double helix, right? And you find that exact same thing, to come back to the first question, in capoeira, that's the significance of the whirling motion that you find in moves like Habu Jahaya, the stingray tail, is that because the supreme being, Ama, amongst the Dogon, started the first creation and that spiral motion, that's why everything, continues in the spiral motion, whether it's the earth around the sun, whether it's the rotation, or revolution of planetary bodies. You find the same thing amongst the Dahomey people, where they talk about this serpent that coils around and starts this spinning motion, that's, how we understand everything took place. You find that in, things like this, and Adinkrahene, which is the concentric circles. There's this idea of that's how, everything came about in the beginning, and that's why life continues to move in that type of motion. So, in terms of UFOs, I haven't seen any. I'm not aware of aliens. They say aliens came down and built the pyramids. However, you can actually go and read the Wadi al-Jarf manuscripts, and you can read from our own ancestors in terms of the logistics of, carving out the limestone, how they were able to move that onto barges, how they took it out to what's now known as the Giza Plateau on water. Recently, like maybe a couple months ago, they're like, oh, we have this major discovery that, we found a submerged water passage and a submerged branch of the Nile that's now under sand. And literally all you have to do is read, and they're telling you, this is how we're moving these huge blocks of stone. We're moving it on water. And then even once they would do carvings, what they would do is that they would put water in front of the carving, and that enables them to reduce the friction to the point where they can move these huge, boulders and carvings and statues on like a sled that you can see that's actually depicted in murals as well. So there are no aliens who are doing any of those things. There are no spaceships that are coming down and zapping anything into existence. And somebody sent me a ridiculous, it's supposed to be like a documentary. I would call it a mockumentary. And in it, they're saying, oh, because they had such primitive tools, they couldn't have carved stone and so forth and so on. So they had cement. They used cement to make all of the pyramids and everything else. And I'm like, this has got to be the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Because anyone who's ever been to, for example, what's referred to as the Valley of the Kings, or anyone who's been to Jessar Jessaru, right? That's Deir el Bahari. This is Hatshepsut's temple that's carved into the side of a mountain, right? So they're saying, oh, because they have quote unquote primitive tools, they can't carve stone. But literally you have people like, I've been inside the tomb of Sarah Jehuti-Mes, very intricately designed and so forth and so on. But literally it's carved into a mountain. So to say, oh, no, they can't carve stone, they have to do concrete to do it, it would be like they're making an entire mountain out of concrete because they don't have, no, literally they're carving into stone. And there are so many examples of carvings into stones. Like all of those tombs are literally carved into mountains. That temple is literally carved into mountains. So it's child's play to carve stone when you're carving into mountains and you're able to do, things on such a grand scale. So there aren't aliens who are doing any of these things. It's our ancestors. And I remember when I was at Jezza Jessaru, it was something like 120 degrees Fahrenheit. It was the hottest place that I think it was even more than that. That's what it was at Luxor when I got back there. But, Luxor was even cooler than Jessar Jessaru, Deir el Bahari. That's the hottest I've ever been anywhere. But, I actually felt like I was getting recharged. I felt like I must be getting like a good 5 shades darker out here in the sun. Meanwhile, there's an Arab guy who's supposed to be the guide, right? He couldn't even stand out there. He was underneath an umbrella sipping Coca-Cola. And when I got done, and I was taking photographs when I was in Kemet, this is 2016, where, this happened, I took 15,000 photographs because I have a study group and I'm teaching Medunetra. So I said it's better to have this as primary source documents rather than line drawings or anything else. So at Deir el Bahari, I think I took something like a good, I don't even know, 1,000, 2,000 photographs. So this Arab guy's like, how are you able to stand out there? And I was like, well, that shows you that your people just got there at 639 CE. We know the date y'all got there, right? Because, they'll have cartoons like Prince of Egypt, and they try to depict people looking like Arabs. It's like, we know the exact date that y'all got there. You got there under the caliph called Umar. And, it's amazing that any black people would have that name, but literally it's under Umar that they, ran roughshod into Kemet, overran it, and drove out a lot of the remaining black people. But of course, there are still black people in Aswan and, in the southern portions and so forth. But yeah, so those aren't aliens who are doing it, it's black people. And for those who are literate, you can actually read the documents where they go into the logistics of how they did it, the work teams that, did it, and so forth and so on. And they, of course, depicted themselves as black people. They called themselves Kemetiu, which is, of course, black people. They called their land Kemet, which is the land of black people. And you had individuals like Hepi Kem and Henenit Kem, which is Hepi the black, Henenit the black. So, these aren't aliens. These aren't spaceships. These are black people.
What advice would you give to black men who struggle with discipline, avoiding difficult tasks, and holding themselves accountable?
So this is a good question. What some people have tried to do is rites of passage. I remember growing up rites of passage programs. I was in a rites of passage program as a young man that was coordinated by my father. That's Nana Kamal Rashidi Kambon, Baba James Small, Malima Barudi. Like this is like my council of elders of men and so forth and so on. One thing that I've come to in retrospect is that, if you're looking at a rites of passage, it remains the question of what are they passing into, right? And if you're there in places like the United Snakes of a Murderer, it becomes very difficult for you to spend all of your time, going through rites of passage. And then once you're done, you're going to work for IBM. You're going to work for Lockheed. I say IBM first because I was in an internship program to go into IBM, and I was like, I don't want to work for white people for the rest of my life, right? So that's how I ended up getting out of engineering. I was the president of NSBE, that's National Society of Black Engineers. I was into mechanical engineering. I made my own computer that I took to Morehouse, my freshman year. So, I was on track to be, that guy, right? But I decided I don't want to work for, the enemies of black people for the rest of my life and so forth and so on. So, the rites of passage is only as good as the space or the place that has already been created for those young adults to pass into. And, I remember there's a lecture by Nana Amos Wilson where he talks about, if you look at, going to, I think it says like 100 lectures, that black people owning 125th Street in New York is worth 100 lectures, right? So, you have a lecture that's telling you to have good self-esteem and be a hard worker and so forth and so on. But, it becomes very clear to see why people aren't motivated when the end of your, education, the end of your rites of passage, the end of your process is to just go back and work for the exact same enemies who've been raping, robbing, pillaging, and plundering, and bringing death and destruction to you. So that's even why we built this space, Abibitumi. That's why my daughter is the one who sends out my newsletters. My children, we're all here as a family, so this is a place of residence, but it's also a place of work. My daughter also, that's my 16-year-old who's the oldest. She did the catering for their Abibitumi conference, hundreds of people across several days. Like, this is the point. So she did a rites of passage in the Akan system, the Bragro. She went to Koforidria, to an Okomfo, that's a healer and diviner. So she went through all of that. But now on the other side of her doing that is she actually has something to pass into.
The practical,
right?
the actual work.
That's the actual work, right? So if you look at a rites of passage as it is here, and the reason I bring up rites of passage is because that's the place where you would inculcate all of those types of things. Be a hard worker, and be diligent, and be motivated. Like all of those types of character traits would be inculcated into that. But it's set up like that because that's the society. That's what we need in our society. Right? We need brave men in our society, so that's why we're going to teach you that. We need, those who know how to hunt. We need those who know how to farm. So whatever we need as a society, that's the reason why we're educating you to be what we need you to be. But as it stands now, we're educating you to be what they need you to be, so that you can eat and get a decent wage, and you can blah blah blah, good salary. Like that's literally what is referred to. I mentioned this before. I think maybe in the interview that we did before, but that's artificial selection, right? So if you look at, I remember some years back, they had this documentary called Cosmos, right? Neil deGrasse Tyson, Obenfo, I should say, Professor or Dr. Neil deGrasse Tyson, and he's going into artificial selection, and he looks at wolves, right? The role of wolves, and how essentially you have certain wolves that, due to genetic predispositions or what have you, they're less afraid of fire, they're more willing to get close to people and so forth, and those are the first ones that got domesticated. Or in some sense, they domesticated the people, right? You're going to feed us, and then we're going to bark for you and do so forth and so on. But literally what it comes down to is the ones who are friendliest are the ones we're going to allow to live. The ones who are mean, that's the ones we're going to put down. So literally it's gone from survival of the fittest, where the wolves are amongst themselves saying, you're the strongest, you should have your genes passed down. You're the smartest, you should have your genes passed down. They're making that decision amongst themselves of whose genes are going to be passed down, to now the person is saying, I'm going to allow you to have your genes passed down, and I'm not going to. And black people, specifically in places like the United States, are like those dogs, where the one that bites you, that's the one like Nana Fred Hampton. They say, no, we're going to put you down, right? The one that's mean, that's Nana Nat Turner. All right, we gotta kill this guy. Denmark Vesey, Gabriel Prosser, Nana Charles Deslans. All of these grandcestors are the ones who they truncate their existence. But then somebody who's like, I don't even know, pick your sellout, right? That's the ones who they're gonna give meritorious, right? They're the ones who they're going to give meritorious manumission. They're going to allow them, to survive, to procreate, and so forth and so on. And essentially, black people in places like the Snakes have been turned into dogs that are bred for the benefit of the quote-unquote master who's doing the breeding. Whereas in our own social context, in our own societies, we decide. So the man who is, has the most wherewithal where it comes to wealth, where it comes to wisdom, where it comes to prosperity, whatever the case may be, then that's the one who everyone wants their daughter to marry that guy. And by that same token, it means that internal to the society, they've decided that this is the one whose genes should be passed down because he represents the best of the best, right? And then vice versa for the women, she represents the best of the best, right? So, that's the major difference. So when you're talking about any type of, self-esteem issues or hard working or so forth and so on, it is to look at it in a vacuum to think that any of those things can be addressed outside of a society where that society is doing the determination for itself of what types of youth it needs. Right now, in those types of places, we're not the ones who are making those decisions. It's the ones who say, if you put on a suit and tie, then we'll allow you to get a job, right? If you, are wearing a dashiki, if you have a name that sounds too black, and, I've come across studies that say, oh, if you have a black name, you can't get a job, like all of those types of things. I actually have an article on names where I touched briefly on that, essentially that's the artificial selection that we're dealing with right now. So you can't look at it, not you specifically, but it can't be looked at in a vacuum. It has to be looked at in the broader context of the society that makes those determinations for us and by us.
Please explain your understanding of the origins of what black people in the West use for the concept of right or wrong, and is this concept beneficial or detrimental?
So, it's interesting. Usually when people look at Ma'at, right, it's usually translated into English along the lines of 7 cardinal virtues, right? So that's truth, justice, righteousness, harmony, balance, order, reciprocity, and that's the idea. However, when you're looking at, for example, I have an article where basically I'm debunking the idea that Ma'at means egalitarianism, right? And the reason why is that there's no white concept that is the equivalent of any of our concepts. How can I say this? Let's look at translating Ma'at as justice. Well, let's look at the word justice. Let's look at, you'll go to the Department of Justice, you'll go to the court, and you'll see a statue of a white woman who's blindfolded, has scales, of course, based upon a concept of Ma'at, because Ma'at is associated with scales, and she has a sword, right? And this place that's supposed to be the seat of justice is built on soil that was stolen from people. Let's look at that, right? The Department of Justice is literally built on soil that was stolen from other people. And anytime they're sentencing people in court, there's a quote by a group called United Front, and they say, treated like a thief on stolen land, a descendant of stolen woman and stolen man. I'm going to say that again. Treated like a thief on stolen land, a descendant of stolen woman and stolen man. So imagine that you're in court, you're waiting for justice to be served, and the ones who are supposed to serve this justice are the ones who stole you and forced you to work for free. They literally kidnapped you, raped you, sodomized you, lobotomized you, and so forth and so on. And it's very little wonder why somebody like Donald Trump can get elected, because you have an entire society of serial killers who've never been punished. They've just been walking around society. Like all those lynchings are serial killers, depraved, psychopathic racial personalities. And imagine you have an entire society of psychopaths and none of them have ever been removed from that society. all of those, old little old white ladies, so-called. I never call them white ladies because lady is a term that actually, evokes some type of esteem. So you have all these, quote unquote white females, and go into their attic and they have all the souvenirs from the lynchings that they were at. They have, the burnt penis that they've put into, their chest of heirlooms, right? So imagine again, and you don't have to imagine, it's literally what you're dealing with in the United States, an entire society of rapists. So look at Thomas Jefferson, and it goes to the point of, their heroes are our enemies, and our heroes are their enemies. So when they talk about, oh, our great founding fathers and so forth, these are rapists. These are murderers, you understand? And they're rapists who have never been caught, just like the incoming president, right? They're murderers who've never been caught. They've never been removed from society. So literally, this gene pool is a cesspool, and that's everybody you look to your right and your left, all these CEOs and so forth and so on. This is what you're dealing with. So, just to come back to, the question about the ethics and so forth, I think that our concepts are very skewed living in places like the United States, because if you look at justice, justice is a perversion. This white, quote unquote, white woman who's called Lady Justice or whatever is literally the enemy of Ma'at. So it's wrong to say Ma'at means justice, because look at what this white woman is doing. Look at, what's going on in Plessy versus Ferguson under her watch, right? Look at what's going on in case after case of black people getting railroaded. Mississippi, a little, child who's been sentenced to the electric chair. Look at all of these miscarriages. They would call miscarriages of justice. No, those are just carriages of justice, because that's what that white woman does, is that she looks out for these quote unquote white people to the detriment of black people, whereas Ma'at is on our side. Ma'at is on the cosmic level, on the socio-political level, and on the individual level, maintaining Ma'at and driving out Isfet, and they are the actual incarnation of Isfet. So where it comes to right and wrong, if our concepts of right and wrong are being brought forth by our enemies, then they're going to tell you, well, the Bible says, listen to your master, and your master said, you should be raped tonight. Well, what's really going on? You understand? So the ones who are giving us our concepts of morality, and I'll quote Nana Bobby Wright, where he says, it's psychopathic for black people to use moral suasion on a people who have no morality where race is the variable. I'll say that again. It's psychopathic for black people to attempt to use moral suasion on a people who have no morality where race is the variable. So again, those who are giving us their concepts of justice, let's not see it as hypocritical. No, let them define, that's their word, that's their concept, and let them define it in their actions, in their structure. Imahu Patao Tepi says, every man teaches as he acts. Not as he speaks, but as he acts. So let them say the word justice, let them demonstrate it for us, and then we'll say, okay, that's not mine, right? If they say, here's what's right? Weapons of mass destruction, let's go bomb this guy. Grenada, let's go invade them. Haiti, let's go invade them. And they say, this is, moral, this is right, this is ethical. Then we need to say, all right, whatever this word right that you're telling us, that's the opposite of what we need to be doing. Whatever you're calling ethical, that's the opposite of what we need to be doing. Whatever you call justice, that's the opposite of what we need to be doing. So once we understand that, then we understand that anything that they see, like I said before, their heroes are our enemies, and our heroes are their enemies. So somebody we would look, fondly upon, Nana Nat Turner, who is kicking in the door and freeing black people on the spot, right? Nana Denmark Vesey, freeing black people on the spot. Those are our heroes. Those are the statues that we would erect. But they won't give us those statues. I have an article that I've been working on. Actually, I just need to finish it up and send it out. Where it's anytime they give us a hero, it's a hero that's in their interest. And it's a tri-continental analysis. So in the United States, the hero that they put in front of us is Martin Luther King. That's their decision, right? Because that's the one who keeps them alive, right? Now, if we're choosing our own hero, then we may choose Nana Nat Turner. Let's put a statue right up of Nana Nat Turner in all public parks and spaces, right? That's our decision. But again, that's the difference between natural selection, where we decide for ourselves, and artificial selection, where they decide. In South Africa, they'll say, oh, the highest one you can aspire to be is Nelson Mandela. Again, be peaceful, and so forth and so on. Why? Because that hero makes sure that they exist. And that's their highest goal, is to exist and to survive. So that's the hero that they will trot out in front of us. If we were deciding for ourselves, we may choose someone like Nana Mangoliso Sobukwe, who said the land is ours. He didn't say what they said at the so-called Freedom Charter or the Cliptown Charter, where they said the land belongs to everyone. Let's all hold hands and blah, blah, blah. That was before Mandela went in there. That's the ANC's sellout move, where they said, no, the land belongs to everybody. So that means the Indo-Aryans like Gandhi. That means, whoever, the Dutch Boers. That means the British. That means the land is everybody's, and anyone who's here, they have just as much right to the land as the indigenous black people. That's the ANC position. That's the Cliptown position, the so-called Freedom Charter position. But Nana Mangaliso Sobukwe said, no, the land is ours for the black people exclusively. You understand? So if we were going to choose our own hero, we may say Mangaliso Sobukwe, even though they have, the Sobukwe clause where they, had him under arrest. And they said that the arrest, the law is just for him specifically. Like literally, imagine a law that's just for one single person. You're arrested because you're Mangaliso Sobukwe, so you can't go. So that's the difference. We may choose Nana Bambata, right, who had this rebellion in 1906 against the British and so forth, where, he rose up. That's the type of hero who actually brought war to our enemies that we would choose for ourselves, right? And then look at India, same thing. Gandhi, let's be peaceful. He says peace, even though he was a warmonger. We can go into that as well. But, if we chose for ourselves, we may choose someone like Gangu Baba, who actually brought war to, the enemies of the people there. We may choose Ambedkar. We may choose anyone if we're choosing for ourselves. So, that's essentially the difference where it comes to heroes, where it comes to concepts, where it comes to anything that they give you. Look at anything that they give you. So look at if you're going to raise a puppy, right? So you yourself, if you're going to raise a puppy, you're raising that puppy up with the hope that that puppy will serve you when it gets older. It'll protect your house. It'll, go and play fetch for you. It'll play with your children nicely. You're not feeding that puppy every day with the hope that, I hope that when you get older, you rip my throat out. And I hope you maul my child, right? So that's the same thing for their concepts. When they tell you this is right and ethical, they're doing it because their concept of what's right and ethical serves them, just like the puppy that they raise. When they give you an ideology, whether that is socialism, communism, capitalism, any type of ism that you can imagine, and all of those are the exact same thing. I often quote Nana Khalid Muhammad, where he says, any society I go into, if it's a Christian country, then the white Christians are on top, the black Christians are on the bottom. If it's a Muslim country, then the white Muslims are on top, the black Muslims are on the bottom. If it's a capitalist country, then the white capitalists are on top, the black capitalists on the bottom. If it's a socialist country, Cuba, then the white socialists are on top, the black socialists are on the bottom. If it is a communist country, and he goes, down a list of every single so-called religion or ideology or whatever that you can name, and they're all the same because at the end of the day, they're all white on top, black on the bottom in the interest of quote-unquote white survival. So just to directly answer your question, anything they give you, whether that's a religion, whether that's a concept, whether that's an ideology, whether that's a stack of, $100 bills, every single thing they give you is for one purpose and one purpose only, and that's in order to help them survive. So no matter how much the Republicans fight against the Democrats, none of them are like, you know what? This is stolen land we're on. Let's all vacate the premises and go back to where we came from. No matter what problems they supposedly have amongst each other, they agree on certain things like, you know what? We should all exist. We should all survive. And that's the bottom line. And if our survival is outside of the interest of black survival, well, then so be it. And, that's all the better, they'll even say. So anything they give us is in their own interest, and their interest is survival, whether they seem nice, whether they seem mean. The common denominator amongst all of them is that they want to survive.
Please break down why the term ancient Egyptians is misleading and historically inaccurate, right? And what term did the so-called ancient Egyptians use to identify themselves?
So that's a very good question. So this is all part of what's called obfuscation. That means to hide something, in order to be disingenuous. It's like intentionally being disingenuous. And part of that is that if you actually hear the word Kemet, there are actually a couple of, I would say, contingencies that they plan for. And this is quote unquote white Egyptologists. One is that they never want you to hear the word Kemet, which is why they say ancient Egypt. They would prefer, the easy route for them is you never ever hear the word Kemet in your life. Then they have an easy route. All you hear is ancient Egypt, ancient Egypt. But then if you do hear the word Kemet, then the next level of obfuscation is, oh, well, Kemet means that the soil is black, right? It doesn't mean the land is, it doesn't mean the people are black, it means the soil is black. And then if you get past that, then they'll even say, Kemet doesn't even mean black at all. And I've heard all three from the same person, right? The exact same person will say, you know, it doesn't mean black. Okay, it means black, but it doesn't refer to the people, it refers to the soil. And, you know, all of these things are really the book that I'm working on. I mentioned earlier the construction of black civilization. Some people think that the reason why they do the obfuscation is because we used to have a glorious past and they don't want us to know about our glorious past. I don't think that that's the reason why. Some people say in the past we used to be spiritually connected. We used to do Egyptian yoga and I guess Egyptian kung fu and eat Egyptian pizza. It's like all, you know, they just take any white concept and put Egyptian in front of it. They say, now this is the Egyptian version of this white thing that I already have. I don't actually want to learn anything from our ancestors. I just want to take the white thing I have and say Egyptian version of that. It's not about that either. When I actually look at the primary text from classical Kemet, you'll find text after text about how everything in Kemet was about keeping non-blacks out of the land of black people. So for black people, our name is our constitution. That's on an individual level, but it's also on a collective level. So if my name is Obadele, it literally translates to the king arrives at the house. When my parents give me that name, there are certain expectations that come from that because your name is expected to define you, direct you, delineate. It's expected to destine. It's supposed to do all of these various things for you. So that's on an individual level. But then on a collective level, what we call ourselves, it also is supposed to have an impact. So in Yoruba, they would say, Urukon Roni, which is the name that's having a deep psychological impact on the person. You understand? In Kiswahili, they say, Ukiridi jina ridi na mambo yake. That's he who inherits a name also adopts its affairs, right? That's to say, if you have a name, then it's expected that that name is going to have an impact on you. So someone who's born on Thursday, Yao Berima, you're expected to be brave because it's like saying Yao the brave man, right? That's the connotation. So if you're called Yao Berima, then someone will say, wouldn't the Yao Berima partner what you for see? Like, how are you Yao Berima and you're such a coward, right? It's like that doesn't match, right? But then one of the highest accolades that someone can give to you in the Tree language, you would say, Nidin and Honam set. Nidin and Honam set. Which is to say this person's name and their body resemble each other, right? So it's again, so now if you come to Kemet, right, we're going back to the idea of obfuscation. The reason why there's so much obfuscation is that in the primary text, you come very clearly to the reason why we called it Kemet was to make sure that black people, this is literally the land of black people. So if you don't understand the meaning of Kemet, you won't understand anything that's going on there. You won't understand why each ruler is trying to get more land of black people into Kemet and ignoring, like there's actually a text from Imahu Sanhat where it says that he will take the lands to the north. He will basically incorporate these lands to the south without thinking about the lands to the north. That is the lands of the non-black people. Even though he was made to crush the sand-faring Bedouins, right? So it's saying that literally he's going to extend the boundaries southwards, and he's not even going to consider the lands to the north. Well, if you don't understand that Kemet means the land of black people, you won't understand, well, why is he doing that? Why doesn't he just take all lands? No, they're telling you he's only concerned of the lands of other black people and incorporating other black people into the nation, which is literally called the land of black people. What else would you expect when it's called the land of the black people? If you look at a text, and this is another text that I cover and translate, the prophecy of Imahu Neferti, it talks about these Amu, that's the term for these non-black Eurasians, these foreigners to the land of black people. It actually talks about a ruler named Ameni, who will rise up from the south, and he will build walls of the ruler, how these Amu will fall to the flame and to the sword, and then Ma'at will return to her seat while Isfet is driven away, right? And it's literally saying that it's only after he has built those walls to keep the Amu out, these non-blacks, Only after he's built those walls, only after they fall to the flame and to the sword, that is a time where Ma'at returns to her seat while Isfet is driven away. Now, if you understand the meaning of Kemet, then it becomes perfectly clear. If you don't, then you have to just try to figure out something. Well, he just wanted to do it. I guess he just. Yeah. But literally, the name tells you everything that he's doing and why he's doing those things. Again, in Imahu Sanhat, the text I mentioned earlier, he mentions these walls of the ruler that were built to trample the sand-faring Bedouins and so forth and so on. So you find text after text. You find texts of the admonitions of Imahu Ipuwer, which is talking about anytime these Amu, these non-blacks, these Eurasians, come into the land of black people, they bring death and destruction, rape and ravishing, pillage and plunder. And you find that in literary texts, you find it in historical texts, you find, on the Techen of, two places. You find it on what they refer to as the Artemio Spiels inscription of Satra Hatshepsut. And then also on the obelisk, the Techen of Hatshepsut, she talks about how she raised up for the first time since the Hyksos, since the Amu were in Kemet destroying what was made. So she's raising up the things that they destroyed for the first time. And you're talking about, decades after the fact.
The more I learn, I understand how I'm limited to certain access to information due to my limitation with the English language. And when you only can understand English language, you find yourself only reading English sources. And I think that's one of the biggest problems in the circulation of misinformation about Egypt.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a proverb that says, in the land of the blind, the one-eyed is king. And because of that limitation, this has brought the rise of a lot of, I wouldn't even call it pseudo-scholarship. That's too much of an accolade. So on YouTube, you find any person who may know one word more than anyone else, and then they'll put themselves up like I'm the expert of it. And because they know that they're in the land of, like, they'll never go to a conference of linguists. They'll never, they're just doing folk etymology. Let's say this word looks like that word. I'm done. No, that you haven't even started. Like literally, yeah. That's the beginning of your research question, not the end of your analysis of this word looks like that word. But you find these people who actually gain a following. And there's a proverb that says, "To one who does not know, a small garden is a forest." And they're actually making a living. They're getting views and subscribers, and literally they're getting paid by these exact same Amu we're talking about, the descendants, to spread nothing but information. And the more, ludicrous the misinformation is, especially when they are just saying the exact same thing as these so-called white Egyptologist scholars, you understand? But literally they know this. They know that I know one word, I know the word cognate, and I know that if you haven't heard the word cognate before, and I'm the one who's going to introduce you to the word cognate, then you're going to think I'm an expert on what cognates are, and literally the person has absolutely no idea what they're talking about whatsoever. Like, I actually had one person who I had a conversation with, and he's, presenting himself like, oh, I understand historical linguistics. Now, the point of historical linguistics, the objective of it is you want to reconstruct various aspects of a language because that language is no longer spoken. There are no more native speakers around where you can go and hear what it sounds like. So based on written forms, based on, daughter languages, you're trying to interpret what that mother language may have sounded like 2,000 years ago because there are no more speakers of that language as it was at that point in time, right? But this person said to me, oh, you didn't reconstruct Yoruba. You should have reconstructed Yoruba. When you did your thesis, you didn't reconstruct Yoruba. And I was sitting there, I was like dumbfounded. I was like, this has to be the dumbest person I've ever had a full conversation with in my entire life. Because Yoruba is a living language. You can go out. Why would you reconstruct it? Like, I can literally go out with my phone, put on the voice recorder, and I can record in field research 1,000 people, 40 million people who are speaking Yoruba exactly as it's spoken right now. So here's somebody who is putting himself out as, oh, I'm a historical linguistics. I'm a historical linguist. I know historical linguistics. When this person doesn't even know the point of historical linguistics, you're literally doing it for no other purpose than I want to find out what it may have been like, and I'm using these methods in order to find out what that language may have been like. But imagine someone saying, oh, well, you need to reconstruct New Jersey English. Well, I can just go to New Jersey and find out exactly what it sounds like. But this is what's going on. This is King Cyclops in the land of the blind. the one-eyed is king, and they're literally just pimping. And I find that there's a lot of that. They're really getting over on the fact that there's misinformation and the fact that they're on white platforms where, white people, if you start saying, oh, Kemet is black, oh, let's shut that down. But if you say, oh, Kemet doesn't mean black, all right, let's give that guy more views, let's boost that up, let's give him more subscribers. And, this is literally something like somebody who's being paid off, like Du Bois was paid off, by Firestone and so forth, to, scuttle the interests of Nana Marcus Garvey in Liberia. This is somebody who's like the equivalent of, the FBI agents who were tasked for killing Nana Fred Hampton. These are literally the worst of the worst sellouts. And again, they know that there's nobody who's going to catch them on it because they're only going to be in places and spaces where, imagine somebody who's that dumb, but you're in a place where everybody is dumber. No, let's not even say dumber. They're more ignorant. They don't know to the point where they can even catch
Let's
that
say
person.
Ill-informed.
Ill-informed. That's a much better, less value judgment. They're ill-informed. We'll keep it at that level.
Thomas Sankara's birthday is coming up, December 21st, and I appreciate if you could speak about the greatness of Thomas Sankara and life lessons that can be learned from his life.
Very good. It's very interesting with the rise of the Sahelian states, right? Because a lot of what they're doing, literally, we showed a documentary a couple of years ago. I ran a film series, and, that was at the University of Ghana Institute of African Studies, up until a colleague who has a white mother said that in the film series, I may have offended a white woman. So they said, you can't do the film series anymore. Imagine that. You don't have to imagine these things because these things actually happen. Things you couldn't even imagine would happen, they actually happen in real life. But let's come back. So we showed a film called Burkina Bay Rising, and it went into the role of, artists, those who were doing plays and so forth and so on. And they were dramatizing, the corruption of Blaise Compaoré and the betrayal and so forth and so on. And it riled up the youth so much that, at certain points they started to take pots and pans into the street. They started, doing various things, burning cars and whatever. And before you know it, it's a revolution to the point where Blaise Compaoré has to leave the country for his own safety and has never been back. So, when you look at how he was even kicked out, that the youth who are there now, the military leaders, like these are the children, the ideological heirs. When he said, oh, there are 4 million Thomas Sankaras, what he was doing was actually spreading the idea, right? There's this idea that, you can kill, the revolutionary, but you can't kill the revolution. That's not a Fred Hampton who said that. But, it's that if you can get your ideas, proliferated to a certain point, then you're able to make sure that even without your body, you can get your things accomplished. And, sometimes when I'm introducing like how powerful language is, I'll tell, my students that I can do something that you may consider to be magical. Like, what? Magic? You can do magic? Oh, and now they're interested, right? How can you do magic? I said, I can make this object move from here to there without touching it. So now they're really, like, the ears are perked up, like, what? Are you serious? How can you do it? So, I said, I just need someone to, assist me with the demonstration, and I'll do it exactly as I said. So I'll put something down here on the desk here, where I'm teaching, and I'll say, all right, everything needs to be exactly just right. So this is, my bodria, this is my horsetail whisk. So I'll say, all right, if you can just, all right, move it over to this side to the exact position. Once it's, organized exactly as I need it from here, now we can do it. So they move it exactly as I say, okay, I did it. With language, right? With language, I made something move from here to there without me touching it. So in classical Kemet, they would talk about Sia, Hu, and Hekau, right? So Sia, exceptional insight, Hu, authoritative utterance, and then Hekau, the power to bring things into being, what they would translate sometimes as magic, right? But literally, even if I don't have a body anymore, if my words have been articulated in such a powerful way, those words, long after my body has transformed into something else, those words can still guide you, they can still direct you, and all of the work that I could do with my own hands, all of that work is getting done without me even needing a physical body to get it done. So that's what I think about when I think about Nana Thomas Sankara. I've read the selected speeches of Nana Thomas Sankara, various, of his works and speeches. and got a lot of inspiration from that and from him sharing his words. In addition to that, from him sharing his works, right? Because there are those who heard what he said, but then there are people who speak, but they're only speaking just for the sake of speaking, right? But remember, as I mentioned before, every man teaches as he acts, is a direct quote from Imahu Ptahhotep. So through his actions, right? So if he's saying that he's going to have a market day where the men go to market and they see what the women are doing, this is an action that's supposed to bring about some type of effect. If he's planning on this great green wall to stop the advance of the Sahara, this is something that he's actually working on. The various things that he's doing, if he's saying that he's not going to pay the debt, right, to so-called France, right? They call it the French, I call it the stench, right? So these are the types of things that are being done. And I came across a news article not too long ago that was mentioning that Mali has just paid off all their debts. That was posted on Abibitumi. And then even more recently, like in the last week or so, some that said that Mali had just paid off all their debts. It was something like $4.7 billion, whatever it was, that they had paid off all their debts. They're also debt-free. So, these are the types of things that they're seeing that, okay, he got assassinated immediately after he gave this speech at the OAU, right, within, the next however long. He gives a speech at the OAU, says that we shouldn't pay the debts. We won't pay the debts. We can't afford to do so, so forth and so on. We shouldn't do it. We should stand in solidarity. Otherwise, I'll be killed and anyone else will be killed, so forth and so on. But they've seen those types of lessons. They've seen the work that he did, what he said, and so forth. And then they're learning from those things in order to, be able to bring out liberation for black people in those specific countries of Niger, of Mali, of Burkina. So, those are the things that I can say is that Nana Thomas Sankara, to me, he encapsulates many things. Sia, that's exceptional insight. Hu, authoritative utterance. And then Hekau, the power to bring things into being. And that power extends long after a person's body is gone, as long as that person's work keeps getting done in accordance to what they've articulated, then it means that those works can go on long after you've passed on.